Hello, everyone. Welcome to the All Day Football Show. I'm your host, Jackson Kellogg. And with the regular season over, we're now getting into the playoffs wildcard weekend, which means these power rankings are going to start to change a little bit. So this week is going to be the final week of 32 to 1. After this week, we'll be going into just playoff teams because there won't be a ton of shift among the teams that are out of the playoffs. So, getting right into it, the team that finishes in last to end the season is the Jacksonville Jaguars. The Jaguars secured the number one overall pick in the draft and the rights pretty much to Trevor Lawrence. They got beat up by the Colts in their last game, the team that they beat at the start of the year. So, comes full circle for the Jaguars. They win one game to start the year, and then they lose the rest. So, Jaguars have a ton of work to do this offseason. Let's see if they can get it done with Trevor Lawrence at the helm. At 31, the New York Jets. New York Jets got beat up by the Patriots in their final game of the season. The Jets, they didn't look terrible, but you could tell that they were a terrible team. So, with the Jets owning the second overall pick, they're not going to be able to get Trevor Lawrence, but are they going to keep Sam Darnold? Or are they going to go and get Justin Fields? It is unknown what the Jets will do at their pick. It'll depend on who they bring in at coach and what their plans for the future seem with them. At 30, the Detroit Lions. The Lions are just a hot dumpster fire right now. They're most likely going to be getting rid of Matthew Stafford, letting a ton of pieces walk, revamping the defense. They're most likely going to sign Robert Saleh from the 49ers to be the future head coach, which I do think is a very good move. He seems to bring a ton of energy for the 49ers defense. He's a great leader, great coach, and I think it'll be a great move for the Lions' future. But this team is going to look very different next year, as they're going to be getting rid of a ton of pieces and trying to reconfigure this team to be a success, which they haven't been for the last many decades. At 29, the Philadelphia Eagles. I really wanted to move the Eagles down to the 32 spot after the stunt they pulled against Washington on Sunday Night Football, because that was just unprofessional, and you play the game to compete. As much as the Jets and Jaguars sucked this year, the only legitimate thing you could come up with for either of them actually tanking was that Jacksonville played Mike Glennon over Minshew. That's all you could come up with. And even at that point, all you have to do is make the argument Mike Glennon gave us the best chance to win, because all the Jags quarterbacks suck. Whereas the Eagles, not only did they pull Ertz out of the game and put Sudfeld in when Ertz was completely healthy, you had other players being pulled out as well who were completely healthy. The Eagles just gave up. They absolutely gave up. They knew what they were doing. They wanted a better draft pick. And guess what, Eagles? You got it. At 28, the Houston Texans. They close out their season in a brawl against the Tennessee Titans. It was a really good game. Deshaun Watson closes out the season, leading the league in passing yards, getting just over 4,800. But that's about the only bright spot you can come up with for this Texans team. The Texans would have the third overall pick right now, except that Bill O'Brien traded that pick to the Dolphins for Laramie Tunsil. So now the Dolphins own the third overall pick. Congratulations, Texans. You just brought Nick Caserio, former Patriots front office man, to be your future general manager. You've done that before, and I think Nick Caserio is done a good job for the Patriots. But we've seen this before, where people bring in a Patriots guy to try and rebuild a Patriots team for themselves, and it doesn't work out. So, and he doesn't even have a ton to work with. The Texans don't have a pick until the third round. So, with as many holes as this team has, they're not going to get any smaller. because they don't have the money to fill the holes that they have. They have a quarterback who's no longer on a rookie contract because Deshaun Watson just got paid. And now you have other very expensive players who shouldn't be getting paid as much as they are. The Texans are in a very terrible position, and it's not going to get any better going forward. At 27, the Cincinnati Bengals. The Bengals were riding a bit of a hot streak, winning a few of their last games to end the season, until they faced Lamar Jackson and the Ravens, who needed a win to guarantee themselves a playoff spot. So that's exactly what the Ravens went out and did. They went out and destroyed the Bengals. The Bengals will look a lot better next year when Joe Burrow comes back. I think the Bengals will be more competitive next year if they rebuild this team right. They do need some help on the defense, but the biggest priority for this Bengals team needs to be to revamp that offensive line because it has been absolutely terrible this year. And they're not going to be able to keep their franchise quarterback upright and healthy with an offensive line like that. At 26, the Denver Broncos. Yes, I know that they lost to the Raiders. Why did you move them up? Because they're better than most of the teams behind them. That's why. So they kept it close against the Raiders. It came down to the last minute. And they only lost by 1 point. Or it was a few. It was like 29-28 or something like that. So the Denver Broncos. John Elway, I thought he was going to get fired. They gave him a higher position, which I think was an absolutely terrible decision. That means the general manager spot is now wide open, and they didn't fire Vic Fangio. So that's going to be a very interesting decision to see what goes on there, as they're going to bring in a general manager who is going to want, most likely, their own new quarterback, which means Drew Lock is probably gone from there. And this Broncos team doesn't need a ton of work. They have offensive weapons. They have an offensive line. They need some work on the defense, getting some help in the back end, and even on the D line. But this team looks like it could be a good force going forward. There's just a very few questions that are very important questions that they're going to have to figure out. At 25, the Atlanta Falcons. The Falcons, they couldn't even keep it close against the Bucs, as the Falcons are going to be in for a very odd offseason where they need to bring in a new head coach and general manager. And the issue with that is, for a rebuild that the Falcons are going to need, they need money to do it. And they don't have the money to do that because two of their two players that they would most likely get rid of have too much money on them, and the Falcons would lose so much money getting rid of Matt Ryan and Julio Jones. It's not even worth it trying to move them. So the Falcons are just kind of stuck right now. And I think the next year or two needs to be spent getting a look at your younger players, building a team together so that when you do move Matt Ryan and you have a quarterback ready to go, that they can succeed in that position and not just get thrown into a dumpster fire like the Falcons have been these last few years. In typical Falcon fashion, I'm sure they'll mess something up in the offseason, just as they did all year, game after game after game. At 24, a NFC South opponent with more of an upside than the Falcons is the Carolina Panthers. Yes, they got destroyed by the Saints this past weekend, but that was to be expected. This Panthers team does have a good outlook going forward. This team is young, it's growing, and do I think Teddy Bridgewater is the answer? No, I've said it multiple times. So if the Panthers do, I don't think they bring someone in this offseason, but in the future, when they do bring in a younger, talented player, I do think this Panthers team will be competitive and is going to have a shot at possibly competing in the playoffs and maybe even a Super Bowl if this team develops correctly, which it's on the right path to. At 23, the Dallas Cowboys. The Dallas Cowboys couldn't close out the season with a win. If they beat the Giants, they would have been in position to where if Washington lost to the Eagles, they would have made the playoffs. But that didn't happen. They lost to the Giants pretty badly too. The score didn't show it, but the Giants are definitely a less talented team and they couldn't beat them. So that just goes to show that the Cowboys do have a ton of things they need to fix this offseason. That offense did not look right at all without Dak Prescott in it. And Zeke just had the worst year of his career, so he's going to have to step up from that and prove that the money he's making is going to be worth it for them. And that defense needs a complete rebuild, starting with the back end, as Trayvon Diggs is the only person in that back end worth keeping. So the Cowboys have some work, and America's team is going to be a little bit woeful for a while. At 22, the team that beat the Dallas Cowboys is the New York Giants. The Giants, who sat at 6-10 going into Sunday night. If the Eagles were to win, then they would have made the playoffs with a tiebreaker over Washington. The Giants didn't even get the chance to see that, as the Eagles just gave up with only being down 3 going into the fourth quarter. The Giants players were not happy. It was acceptable because, you go in to compete and they didn't get a chance. But the opposite argument could be made where if you want to make the playoffs, don't go 6-10 then. So it could go either way. But either way, the Giants are, as much as a Giants hater as I could be, the Giants are setting themselves up for the future. Joe Judge looks to be installing a good culture with the Giants. The team is playing well with scraps. So now imagine when they get more talented. And one thing that is going to have to be addressed is the Daniel Jones issue, because Daniel Jones, I don't think, is the future for this franchise. He hasn't shown the ability to be a star, and when stars come draft after draft, it's kind of hard to keep your job now being just a game manager, or even worse than that. Daniel Jones hasn't even been able to be a game manager. He tries too much, and it costs the team losses. He's turnover prone, and he's skittish. So we'll see what the Giants do in the next year, but I think we could expect possibly the Giants winning the division next year. At 21, the Minnesota Vikings. The Vikings went into a shootout with the Lions, in which they pulled through with the win. They close out the season just under 500, where they had a good middle of the season but couldn't close out. The Vikings are in an interesting position where it sounds like Gary Kubiak might be retiring, and one thing that was brought up was that Gary Kubiak is part of the reason that Dalvin Cook has been having monster seasons recently, because Gary Kubiak set up offenses where guys like Justin Forsett were able to thrive. There was another running back I saw that he had, but guys that were mediocre were able to thrive under Gary Kubiak. And not to knock on Dalvin Cook, because Dalvin Cook has clearly been a great running back, but whoever they bring in to be the OC isn't going to have the same function that Kubiak had. So we'll see what the new OC, whoever it is going to do with Dalvin Cook, whether it's go similar, because I don't think the Vikings' issues were among the offense, because other than Kirk Cousins, the offense, they have talent. Justin Jefferson is a good young talent. Adam Thielen is still balling. They have dual tight ends in Irv Smith and Kyle Rudolph. But the defense needs plenty of work, because that secondary, as young as it is, they could not get anything done this year, and it caused for teams to be able to just chuck the rock against them. So the Vikings, they're going to need a decent amount of work this offseason to be competitive in an NFC North, which just sent 2 teams to the playoffs this year. So it's a tough one for the Vikings. At 20, the LA Chargers. The Chargers gave the Chiefs their second loss of the year, except the Chiefs didn't play any of their starters. So it was kind of expected. The Chargers ran up the score. They won by over 20 points. Justin Herbert is the real deal, and I've said that time and time again, and this team needs to do what it can to build around them. They fired Anthony Lynn. They're going to bring in a new offensive coordinator for Justin Herbert, or new head coach for Justin Herbert, my bad. But whoever they bring in needs to work with Justin Herbert, because we've seen it with other teams where if you keep switching up who your coach and offensive play caller are every year with a rookie quarterback, then it leads to some issues with that rookie because they're going to have to learn system after system after system, and that's not good for the development of a quarterback. So, as talented as Justin Herbert has shown he could be, they're going to have to work overtime with him to make sure that he can keep his growth going and that he doesn't fall back as some other quarterbacks have from starting good and then falling back. Sam Darnold's development dropped. Baker Mayfield's development dropped for a bit. So you don't want that to happen. You want the development to continue to grow. At 19, the San Francisco 49ers, they kept it close with the Seahawks, but ultimately were not able to pull through. Granted, they were playing with a third-string quarterback, so that's one way to look at it. This 49ers team, they just had an off year that was plagued by injuries. If they can get a lot of their players back next year, rebuild some of their needs over the offseason, like the defense, the back end is going to need some work. The defensive backs, bring in another defensive back there. Maybe get a little bit more offensive talent, and this team is going to go back to competing for Super Bowls. Who knows if they're going to hold on to Jimmy G or bring in a new quarterback? That is up for debate, as Jimmy G can't stay healthy, and when he is on the field has been nothing more than a game manager for the 49ers, who lead a mostly running attack. So the 49ers are going to have a very interesting offseason, and I think if they do it right, that they could just go back to their Super Bowl contending ways. At 18, the Raiders. The Raiders just fell off to end the season, and with Josh Jacobs, who just got DUI'd, that doesn't help them at all. The Raiders, they closed out the season with a win against the Broncos, but this team does have work that needs to be done on both sides of the ball. They need to get Derek Carr a little bit more help. Henry Ruggs he didn't get on the field this year. They were left with putting Nelson Aguilar as his number one receiver. Hunter Renfrow was on and off on the field, and the Raiders can put through a good offensive talent, but they have to be able to execute, and the defense of all things has to help them out. The defense is what plagued a lot of the Raiders' issues this year, but they did have their own offensive inconsistencies. But next year, Derek Carr's not the issue. They need to hold on to him. Josh Jacobs with that backfield, and Jalen Richard, even as a change of pace back, did well. You got to get Henry Ruggs to develop so that you can throw Ruggs, Renfrow, and Aguilar out onto the field. Even John Gruden had talked about that he wants to get Aguilar re-signed. So, get those three out on the field. You're most likely going to trade or release Tyrell Williams, Zay Jones, get them out of there. Bring in another offensive weapon, I think, and you still have Darren Waller. So, and the offensive line, when healthy, plays very well. So the offense, for the most part, is set. Over the offseason, they need to put a lot of work into that defense, though. At 17, the Arizona Cardinals. The Cardinals just fell off a cliff to end their season, losing 5 of their last 7 games after their victory of the Hail Murray. Whereas it's funny how that goes, because after that crazy win, the Cardinals fell off a cliff, whereas the Bills, who lost that game, went on to become the second best team in the AFC. So the Cardinals, they got some work to do, because that cannot happen where they just lose games. Kyler Murray was dealing with an injury in their final game against the Rams. But John Wolford was starting at quarterback for the Rams, and that defense couldn't stop them. So, other than the opening interception that they had, they couldn't really do much. And this defense needs work. They're going to have to bring in more pass rush, more corners. This team needs a lot of work defensively. And for a team that was expected to make the playoffs this year, they definitely fell short, going 8-8. At 16, my New England Patriots, who were able to close out the season with a win, which was a bit of a shock to me, honestly, and especially in the way that they dominated in the game with the passing game. Sony Michel looked like the best he has in the last 2 years, which was very good to see, looking at the outlook of the running back position. With Michel and Harris going back and forth between carries, if they re-sign James White, to be their third down back and develop J.J. Taylor. This running back group is going to be very good going forward. The defense, they played okay. Granted, they were playing a lot of their younger players. They were playing defensive. They were playing cornerbacks at linebacker for a lot of the game. And other safeties, whether it was Adrian Phillips, Jonathan Jones, Kyle Duggar, they were playing linebacker due to all the injuries they had there, and they still performed. This team, other than Chase Winovich, has no pass rush. They don't know how to stop the run either. So I think that's one of the biggest needs for the offseason for the Patriots. They need to work on the defensive line, and they need to get offensive weapons and a new quarterback. That's the shopping list for the Patriots this offseason, and it is doable. Their draft is going to be a little bit tougher to do due to their odd position in the middle of the draft. You're not going to get the best players, which means you might be reaching for who you want to get, and they don't have the plethora of picks to go trade up and get players either. So that'll be interesting to see what the Patriots do there. But all in all, the Patriots got a win. It was a good closeout to the season, although they did finish with a losing record for the first time in over 2 decades. So that's crazy to see. But there is a bright future for them, and I hope that this offseason goes correctly for them. At 15, the last team on this list who did not make the playoffs is the Miami Dolphins. The Dolphins got just straight creamed by the Buffalo Bills. It was just a disaster, allowing over 56 points from the Bills. That is just a terrible look for a team that was supposed to be all a defensive team going forward. Tua played absolutely atrocious, throwing 3 interceptions in the game. It's just a very bad spot for the Dolphins to be in, as a team who was making a push for the playoffs to get absolutely destroyed like that. So the Dolphins are going to have some work going forward. They're going to need to assess if Tua is the future quarterback of this team, because he did not look great in his time this year. Whereas quarterbacks like Joe Burrow and Justin Herbert, who was taken after Tua, by the way, shined in their teams when they played. They carried the team on their back and were the bright spots of their team, and Tua was not even close to being able to do that. This team would be a playoff team if Joe Burrow or Justin Herbert were playing quarterback this year. Just would like to put that out there. Now, getting into the playoff teams, the first team to surprisingly make the playoffs was the Chicago Bears, who pulled through with an end-of-the-season run, though they did lose their final game and got some help from the Cardinals losing. This team shocked the NFL world as they somehow made the playoffs with Mitch Trubisky riding the helm at quarterback. I don't know why this team ever switched away from Mitch Trubisky to Nick Foles as a starter. Trubisky was definitely more talented. He was just shakier. When Trubisky has shown he's on his game, but he just hasn't shown it that much in these last few years, which is going to lead to the Bears might have to re-sign Trubisky. But for now, they have to worry about playing the New Orleans Saints in the playoffs. So we'll see if they can pull through with a win against the Saints, and if they can, shocker. But if not, it won't be a huge letdown for them, as very few people, including myself, didn't even expect them to make the playoffs at this point. At 13, the Washington football team. A win is a win in the NFL, and although nobody likes what the Eagles did, nobody places blame on Washington, who played the game that they wanted to play and got the win that they needed. So Washington going forward has made the playoffs with a 7-9 record, and they will play the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, who are probably going to run up the score on them. So Washington, they do have some issues they need to figure out in the offseason when they do get destroyed, because Alex Smith, as well as he's done, he's going to win Comeback Player of the Year, and they should name the award after him. But Alex Smith is not the answer for the future, and they're going to need to bring in a quarterback after they cut Dwayne Haskins. So we'll see what this team does in the offseason. But for now, they do have to worry about beating the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. At 12, the LA Rams. The Rams got a win against the Cardinals, in which they weren't playing Jared Goff, as Jared Goff is dealing with an injury, and Goff is questionable to be playing against the Seattle Seahawks this week. So if he's not playing, then I think it's it's just going to be a win for the Seahawks. If he is, it will be competitive, but I do think the Seahawks will still take it. The Rams are not in a position to go win a Super Bowl right now, and they've fallen flat from their 2 years away from the Super Bowl. So the Rams, congratulations on making the playoffs, but don't expect to go too far. They do still have some work that they need to do, more so on the offensive side of the ball. Their three-headed running back monster quickly turned into just Cam Akers, and then Cam Akers got hurt. So yeah, the Rams, they're a playoff team, but they're not a Super Bowl contender yet. At 11, the Indianapolis Colts. Yes, I've been low on the Colts all year because they made the playoffs, but it doesn't mean they're a great team. I forget which seed they pulled in at, but I think the Colts came in are now the 7th seed because it goes Ravens, Browns, Colts. So the Colts got the 7th seed, which means they have to play the Buffalo Bills in the wild card round, who are going to trounce them. Because this Colts offense isn't great. Phillip Rivers is probably going to retire this offseason. And the defense is good, not great. So the Colts, they're not mediocre, they're not terrible. They're just average. And they got a lucky bit of wins this year. So that's only the only way to put it. At 10, the Pittsburgh Steelers, who lost to the Browns, though they weren't playing some of their best players because their playoff spot was pretty much secured. They expected the Bills to beat the Dolphins, and so they just sat their starters. And with the Steelers, with the 3rd seed, will play the Browns again, so they'll go back-to-back in preparation. I do think the Browns are going to have a chance to beat the Steelers full strength. This Steelers team has not been very strong at the end of the season here, and I think it's going to be tough for them in these playoffs. There's teams that are clearly better than them, and they've fallen flat from being 11-0 at one point in the season. So we'll see if they can finish what they started and go for a Super Bowl title. At number 9, the Tennessee Titans. Derrick Henry rushed for over 2,000 yards this year. That is just insane. Rushing for over 240 yards and 2 touchdowns against the Houston Texans in a game that they needed to win. It wasn't even just we'll just feed Derrick Henry type of game. We have no stake in this game. The Titans needed the win to make the playoffs. Granted, that was before the Dolphins got blasted, but if the Titans lost and the rest of the other teams that they were in a tie with won, Titans would have not made the playoffs. So they needed the win. They got it. They take the 4th seed, winning the AFC South title for the first time in a few years. So that means they will play the Baltimore Ravens in the wild card round, which is going to be a good game. Honestly, I don't know who pulls through in the end, but it will be a very good game as the Titans are competitive. They do have work to be done on the defensive side of the ball, but Derrick Henry will try and lead this team to a victory. At number 8, the Cleveland Browns. The Browns have made the playoffs for the first time since I think it was 2002 was what I saw. So, the Browns, congratulations Browns. I've been rooting for you for the last few years to make the playoffs, hoping that they would make it, and they finally did. I said they would make the playoffs this year. I had a bunch of people who didn't believe me. They did it. This team is talented. They just have to put it all together, and when they do, they're a great team. So I do think the Browns have a chance to go pretty far in these playoffs if they can knock off the Steelers, possibly making it to the divisional round, and depending on who they play, the conference championships. So we'll see what the Browns can do in these playoffs, and I do think this is a good team going forward. Getting into, so from 7-1, there is no movements. So the Ravens, they got to win against the Bengals. They're looking better than they did at the midway point through the season. The Ravens, around the middle of the season, did not look like a great team. They were losing to teams that they weren't expected to, including my Patriots. So the Ravens, they started to get it together. They're looking like a better team. I'm still waiting for the Madden curse to show up and make its claim. Might happen in these playoffs where Lamar Jackson has not won a playoff game. So we'll see if he can for the first time in his career. We'll see if the Ravens can make it to the divisional round and possibly the Super Bowl. At 6, the New Orleans Saints. I want to move the Saints up, but I will when they make it through the playoffs to the Super Bowl. At the moment, they're just going to stay at the 6th spot as teams ahead of them are winning games. The Saints, I think, are better than the teams ahead of them, but it's tough to drop teams that are winning. So, for now, the Saints were having the roughest patch later in the season than teams ahead of them. So, the Saints, if they could beat the Bears, they'll move up possibly, depending on who ahead of them doesn't drop. Doesn't drop. But the Saints are still my Super Bowl pick, even though they're at the 6th spot. Saints will go in, they'll beat the Bears, they'll take on whoever they need to in the divisional, they'll go beat the Packers in the conference championship, and they'll go beat the Chiefs in the Super Bowl. So I'm still riding with the Saints and Drew Brees, which it's speculated this is his last run. At number 5, the Seattle Seahawks, who we can't figure out what the Seahawks are as a team, because at times during the season they looked like a Super Bowl caliber team who could run up the score on you despite what their defense was. And now they haven't been that team. The Seahawks have started to fall flat towards the end of the season here, and they're having close games against teams that they're expected to beat, being these Super Bowl contenders. And I think that might plague the Seahawks in these playoffs. I think, like the Packers, they might fall short to teams that they weren't expected to lose to. So we'll see what the Seahawks can do. We'll see if they can prove me wrong. But I do see some issues with the Seahawks going forward. At number 4, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. The Buccaneers have just been blasting opponents left and right to end the season. Granted, they've been weaker opponents in the Falcons and the Lions, but they're still doing it. It's good practice for them for what they're going to have to do in these playoffs, because these are legitimate playoff contenders now that they're going to have to beat. And they've lost to some of these teams before, including the Bears, the Saints twice. So the Buccaneers are going to they have their work cut out for them. So we'll see what they can do and possibly go for a Super Bowl run, as I don't think this is Brady's last year. I think he'll play out his contract with the Bucs, and he'll retire at 45 with the Patriots on a one-day contract. But for now, Brady's going to go try and lead the Bucs to a Super Bowl, which would be Brady's 10th, his 10th Super Bowl appearance in the last 2 decades, as he's won 6, appeared in another 3. So if he made the Super Bowl this year, it would be his 10th Super Bowl appearance. And we'll see if he could do it. Getting into the top 3, the Buffalo Bills at number 3. I want them to be number 2, but Packers are the number 1 seed for the NFC. So the Bills are a great team. They have very few flaws within them. Josh Allen is kicking butt. Stephon Diggs is looking like the best move of the offseason. No questions asked about that, as the Bills are going to go compete for a Super Bowl after winning the division for the first time since the 90s and ending a very long playoff or division drought. So with the Bills making the playoffs and looking like these contenders, I do think they're the one team that has a chance to beat the Chiefs, meaning they're going to have to make the conference championships to do that. So that would include beating the Indianapolis Colts, and then beating whatever team comes up behind them, whether it's the Browns, Ravens, or Titans. So we'll see if they can do it. I do think they can. They just have to put it all together and get it done. At number 2, the Packers. Packers had a close win over the Bears, but a win is a win, as we say. The Packers take the number 1 seed in the NFC. I do have a feeling the Packers are a little bit pretenders. This defense has been inconsistent for the Packers at best, and the Packers just keep losing offensive linemen like flies, meaning there's not going to be a ton of people to protect Aaron Rodgers going into the divisional round of the playoffs, as they do get the first round bye. So the Packers, they're going to have a few weeks of rest, or a week of rest, and then another week to prepare against whatever team is thrown at them, whether it's the Bears for the 3rd time this year, the Rams, Buccaneers, or Washington. So we'll see how the Packers can close out these playoffs, close out their season, and possibly go for a Super Bowl title. And at the number 1 seed, yes, I know they lost, alright, but I'm not going to drop them. They didn't play any of their starters. So the Chiefs are still the best team in the AFC. They're the best team in the league. They're going to go for a back-to-back Super Bowl title. Do I think they can do it? Yes. Do I think they will? No. Like I said, they'll make the Super Bowl, but they will lose to the Saints, as the Chiefs, they've been very unstoppable this year, but there's always a wall at some point, and we've seen it with the Patriots. So we'll see if the Chiefs get cocky, if they start to go crazy. Who knows? This is the NFL, where any given Sunday, and it still counts, especially in the playoffs. So we'll see what happens. Anyways, guys, thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to leave a like and subscribe. It would be greatly appreciated. Hope you all have a great time watching these wildcard games. 2 triple header days, Saturday and Sunday. Can't wait, even though my Patriots are out of it. So have a good rest of your week, and let's hope that the Patriots can get done what they need to this offseason.